Hello and welcome to today's episode of Courage Permission Slip. I'm Kia, your host, and I can't tell you how excited I am to introduce you to my guest today. She is a friend. She is one of the biggest badasses that I know, and I'm glad that she is here with us today, Lauren McGoodwin. And let me tell you a little bit about Miss Lauren. Lauren is the Chief Executive Officer of Career Contessa, the host of Career Contessa's weekly podcast, The Females, great podcast, by the way, author of Power Moves, and has a life mission to help women build successful and fulfilling careers on their terms. Lauren has spoken at TED Women, Watermark Conference for Women, and South by Southwest. And she is a regular contributor on outlets such as Good Morning America, Goop, and more. Welcome, Lauren.
Hi, Kia. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And, as I was reading, I was like, you and I have had these conversations before. I know you. We've known each other for many years. And when I'm reading your bio, I'm like, man, she's done a lot. Like, she's out here doing things. When you hear your bio, or when you're like tweaking your bio or doing an inventory of your body of work, do you ever like sit back and say, "Ooh, wow, I'm really out here. I'm really doing it."
Yes, actually, I do, because it's so easy to forget like the stuff you've done, and it's why it's so important to keep, like, I guess on Career Contessa it's easy because we have like a press page, but like keep that smile file or keep a track record of your stuff, because it is that confidence boost before you go on a podcast, before you do a talk, before someone asks you what's your rate to come do XYZ. You look at all the cool things you've done and you think, no, you are worth that amount. Don't feel weird about asking for that, those sort of things. So I mean, I know this sounds like I'm bragging, but yeah, I feel great about it. And it's also, people should know I've been working at this for almost 10 years. Those things that are put together in like 3 sentences have been spaced out over 10 years, so with a ton of no's. Like, I could also have a bio of like, here's all the things I didn't get and all the things I pitched and didn't have. So, but we'll stick to the highlight reel because that's prettier.
Yeah. But it's important to know that there are no's, right? Like, it's not, it's not all the glitz and glamour, and you have to, you have to be willing to get up and try again, because it stinks. It stinks when you don't get a response. It stinks when you get a no to saying, no, you're not high enough profile, or whatever it is. And so you have to be willing to, brush that off and say, okay, I'm going to try again, and not let that, color your approach too much.
Absolutely. And I also think it's interesting because most of the big experiences, so like you mentioned, like speaking at TED Women, that's because I went to somebody's 30th birthday luncheon that I like was sort of surprised that I got even invited to. And I sat next to this woman who worked for TED events. She and I stayed in touch. We got happy hour a few times, and she just happened to have an opening. Like, so when people hear this stuff too, just know that like, I've pitched myself to a lot of things and been told no. Most of the stuff I've gotten has taken me years of relationship building, because pitching to someone in a cold email, it's hard for them to get to know you. But if you build relationships, then opportunities come from that, which is why it takes 10 years for the highlight reel in 10 seconds to be able to be read out, which is, I always think it's important to kind of put that out there, because sometimes I think people are looking for this like quick fix or this magic way of getting all these accolades really quickly. And if you know the quick fix, please email me. I'm happy. I would love to know the tip, but I don't have one other than to say hard work and years of relationship building and showing up day in and day out without the expectation it's going to turn into that opportunity or that thing,
Yeah. I love so much that you said that, to keep showing up and, and do it without the expectation that you're going to get XYZ out of it. And, to your point about the 10 years, like, I think when I look back at my bio and all the things that I had to do to get there, I mean, a lot of that was born out of a 20
Yeah.
year plus career of doing
Hmm.
that stuff. And so you're right, like it doesn't happen overnight, but social media wants you to think differently about that.
Always.
And so, that's why sometimes we've got to take a step back because it is not a quick get.
Mm-mm. No,
Yeah.
I'll tell everyone else the secret of social media is people recycle their like greatest hits all the time. So, you didn't see when they got the greatest hit 2 years ago originally, but they make it seem like
Mhm.
they're getting this greatest hit all the time. They're just
Yes.
recycling it and doing it in a new way. So just remember
Right.
that too with social
Right.
media. Like maybe they've
Yes.
been on that PR thing or they got whatever review or top highlight for their podcast once and you're comparing yourself because you're like, oh my gosh, they're always doing this. Just remember, people can
Yeah.
recycle that
Right.
stuff on social media
Right.
too.
Right. Yes, there are strategies, people.
Yes, yes.
So yes, so we will leave that at that. But you're so right. It's just, stay in your lane, focus on your lane, keep showing up, and the opportunities will come. You will get the recognition.
Hmm.
Your name is going to be mentioned in rooms that you're not in,
Yep,
but you have to keep showing up and, walking in your purpose, walking in joy, doing things from a joyful place, not because you feel like you have to.
yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the
Um,
secret sauce.
yes, exactly. Ding ding.
Yes.
But when I think about the things that you've done and how you keep showing up and even in the face of no's. And so I'm really interested to start in this place of, when you hear the word courage, what comes to mind? Like, how do you define it?
Yeah, I mean, to me, courage is the, ability to proceed with your lives despite facing these fears. What are your daily acts of courage that help you move forward and upward despite the unplanned thing that got thrown at you, despite the fear that is got you feeling like I can't hit send on this email. I think it's interesting because courage we think of as like these big pivotal moments of bravery, like standing up to the person and quitting your job and stuff. And what I think is actually the most courageous thing are the small act, the courageous acts, the courageous conversations, the um pushing yourself through the moment of like, I don't really want to do anything, but I'm going to sit here and spend 15 minutes on it and see if I get anywhere with it. Like, I think all of those things take courage. And like I said, I think it's pushing through despite the fear that whether it's conscious or subconscious is surrounding you probably.
Mm. I really like that you distilled that into, courage isn't always the big things. It's courage in those small, everyday moments that don't
Hmm.
feel like a big deal at the time,
Hmm.
but can pave the way to being a big deal later,
Yeah.
which is really kind of where I wanted to go next. Because, for anyone watching or listening, unless you know Lauren and really know her story, you may not know that Career Contessa was inspired by Lauren's master's thesis in grad school. And
Yeah.
so I would love for you to talk a little bit, Lauren, about, how do you give yourself permission to get from that master's thesis to where you are right now?
Yeah, I think at the beginning it was just sort of permission to be curious. I think there's levels of permission, right? And my first level of permission was one, it was an assignment. So I kind of had to do it, right? Which is helpful because if somebody's assigning you something, and I was always kind of like the student who was going to do the assignment. So um, I think the first level of permission was that Career Contessa was the prototype that I was using to prove my master's thesis. The hypothesis was that the workplace was going to have more women in it by 2020, which at the time seemed a long time away, than any other generation of women in the workplace before, and that there were no career resources that were supporting women so that they could. And this was just at the very beginning where we were realizing through research and data that companies that had more diversity in them performed better. And so it was like, okay, so this is good for companies, this is good for products, this is good for society, but like there isn't anything that's helping women um, you know develop their careers and navigate their careers. And then on top of that, workplaces were definitely built for this 9 to 5. There's a parent at home the whole time. And most of the time it was men. So
Mhm.
the hypothesis was that we needed to have a career resource built for us. And then Career Contessa was that prototype. So I think the courage in the beginning was sort of like, oh, I'm trying to prove my point, and I need this like visual example, or I need this thing to show in the thesis. One of the things that happened in the thesis is I had to run focus groups, and the feedback from the focus groups was really, really positive. I am definitely a person where it's like I will follow the breadcrumb, but there has to be another breadcrumb in front of me. And so like their positive feedback was a breadcrumb in front of me. Then it was, so that had me develop, the site. Then the next breadcrumb was a developer telling me, I don't know what year we were traveling once, and he was like, I was a recruiter, a tech recruiter for Hulu. So we were traveling to schools and things like that. Should add some context. I'm not just like traveling around the world with these developers. It was for work. And he was asking me like, do you want to be a recruiter forever? And anyway, I kind of mentioned my career path. And he's like, you should definitely keep that website around because it will help you in whatever you're going to do next. Like if you want to become a product developer or a product manager, which is what I thought I wanted to be,
Mm.
having a website would be helpful. That was the next breadcrumb. So like, I'm one of those people where like, I'm looking for you to drop the breadcrumb and then I can place it in front. But I'm kind of looking, the permission was sort of those breadcrumbs that kept coming.
Mm.
And then while I was at Hulu, I was running Career Contessa. And then it was a couple press pieces of like, I remember I pitched Pop Sugar right away and they accepted. And so like that was another breadcrumb. So I look for this sort of like proof of the concept. So I don't know if it's so much that I'm giving myself permission to do these things. What I'm doing is I was giving myself permission to try something with always a plenty of backup. Like if it doesn't work, it's okay because I have this. If this doesn't happen, it's all right. I have that. I think the big permission came when I actually didn't. There wasn't necessarily a breadcrumb. It was like, are you going to leave Hulu and do this full time, or are you not? And to be honest, well, actually, that was a breadcrumb. I happened to go to South by Southwest for something I was doing for work. And I caught one panel the whole weekend. And it was this women entrepreneur panel. And they were amazing. And they asked the women, like, if you could change one thing, what would you do differently? And they all said, I wish I had started sooner. And I literally took that and I went back and I had already been thinking about it. So it wasn't near, I make it sound like it was
Mm.
like this overnight decision, but it was
Mhm.
something where it kind of put it was the nail in the coffin for me in terms of like, okay, I'm doing this. So I would say that my permission comes from the feedback of other people. I don't know if that's always a good thing because you know what, that means I'm very
Mm.
dependent on
Mm.
other people's feedback in order for me to make those next moves. But I can tell you in the very beginning, those were the breadcrumbs that led me up to feeling like I'm courageous enough to do this thing. And yet I always had a plan B, C, D, E in the background too. Like, over the years, I've had less of those, but at the very beginning, I had a lot of those.
And so, you know, hearing those women say, wish I had started sooner, as like the one thing that they would change. What was it about that was the final nail in the coffin? Was it that you felt like you had been sitting on it too long, or was there something else that was the thing that spurred you to really do that self-reflection and then make the decision?
I think it's a little bit of my personality. I've always been a little bit of an impatient person. And I think the second thing was a little bit more probably like this fear of missing out, like fear of missing the
Mm.
timing of
Mm.
this is my window. And part of that was, at the time, like, I just had rent. Like I didn't have like in myself, like it wasn't, I didn't have like a ton of expenses where the decision was super complicated, I guess and I remember I had like just paid off my school debt. So I was like feeling really like this is the one time in my life where I can maybe do this. Where if it doesn't work out, I think it was a matter of like partially impatience and partially feeling like this is the window of opportunity. If you don't take it, you're not going to be able, like, you might not get this back. And I definitely kind of have a personality where I have a fear of wasting. I always say I hate wasting time and I hate wasting money. So those two things go hand in hand. And I think a lot of that, like I said, came down to kind of being in a privileged place with the timing of it. Um, So yeah, I think it was them saying it just probably, maybe I'm impatient and competitive because I was like, oh, I better start now. I don't want to be the last person,
Mm,
at the starting line kind of thing too.
mhm, mhm, mhm. So I love that you talked about one of the fears that came up or that was in the back of your head of like fear of missing that window, which I know you and I hear that a lot for people who are looking to transition in their careers.
Yeah.
Are there any fears? So now that you know you've been in this game for a while now, right? Like you've been the CEO for quite a bit of time.
Yeah.
And are there other fears that you notice that pop up now?
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of the same fears. They're
Mm,
just like I still have a fear of missing out. Like, are
mm,
we innovative,
mm,
our ideas and our content enough? I think in the beginning it's almost like the fear is that you can't build stuff quickly enough. And then the fear at this stage is, am I doing enough to stay relevant? Are we
mm,
um you know are we keeping up as things change? Or like now I have so many things, like when I change this I have to change all that kind of stuff. Or um thinking about, at this point I've had plenty of revenue streams that we've launched that haven't worked. I've had
mhm,
revenue streams that we
mhm.
launched that do work. So it's I think the fears now a little bit are about like, what are the parts to focus on now, something is working. And um there's also sometimes a fear of like, I have been doing this for a while, and should we be bigger? Should, more
Mm,
people know of us? Should we be
mhm.
um I don't know, higher up on
Yeah,
whatever it is that we're looking at. But so there are certainly fears. They're just different. It's like in the beginning, your fear is like that you're not going to have a spot at all. Like you're not going to have your
mhm,
website. You're not going to have your
mhm.
your stuff. That you'll never get launched. So you'll just be talking about it forever. Then there's the state of, once you have it, staying relevant and making sure that what you're putting out there is worth it for people, right? You don't want to be
Yeah.
wasting people's
Mm,
time. And also, like, I think one thing that's interesting about the career landscape, just coincidentally over the last 10 years, is like it's changed a lot. We went from thinking girl boss was like hustle, hustle, hustle the way to be, to people recognizing like, my career, my job doesn't love me. I don't understand this. It's like my job isn't
mhm,
fulfilling every single part of my,
mhm.
my needs and wants. Like that's crazy. And so there seems to be a lot of shifts that happen workplace wise, and then you throw in a pandemic, and it's like, okay, not only does it keep things interesting, but it's even more important that we're staying kind of relevant with the content and the resources we're providing. And there are plenty of times where your idea on paper makes total sense, and then you do it in reality and it doesn't work. And so
Mhm.
I have fears about that too. Like if
Yeah,
I can't make this thing work, how much longer do you do it
yeah,
for, or do you do that
yeah.
for? And I don't mean career success, I mean like specific things. But
Sure.
so yeah, always there's
Mhm,
fear.
mhm.
um they're just different.
Yeah.
And I also think that it's like you're able to put up with more stuff the longer it goes on. Like I always give this example, like the first time I had an employee where stuff wasn't going well and I had to have like tough conversations, I was so nervous about it, right?
Yeah.
Now I'm much better about having tough
Mhm,
conversations. Like these are
mhm.
all muscles that get stronger the longer you're using them or have them. If things were broken or I got told no, I was much more like kind of devastated by it. And now I'm a little bit more like, all right, well, they said no, so what's next? Like you just give less time to certain things
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. And so would you say that's how you manage the fears that do come up or the doubts or, the little like inner critic conversations is that you just keep pushing forward?
I think sometimes yes.
Mhm,
I think honestly, there are plenty of times where I spin my wheels and I spend way too much time going down a rabbit hole, or beating myself up. And
mhm,
I think self-compassion is actually like something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and about like there can be this strategy, and I think a lot of women do it too, where, and I'm very guilty of it, my strategy has been, in order to kind of get me to the next level, I like beat myself down, and it's like,
mm,
and try to use that as this motivation and this fuel to amp myself up to the next place. And um the reason why that's a bad strategy is because it works, but it's painful in the process. And so I think what I'm trying to be better about is getting to that next place without having to like, so I think what happens sometimes too is like your psyche wants someone or something to blame. And if it doesn't, then it goes straight for you.
Yeah.
Right. And so look, there are plenty of times in business where 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. And you're like, is it because I'm not smart enough? Is it because I didn't do this
Mm,
enough? What is it that they have that I don't have? So if I'm being really honest about how I push through those things, a lot of times I have to take a step back, or I have to um, like call someone who can kind of like see this other side of it, like a mentor or a friend who understands it and can kind of talk. Like it's good to have business friends for
mhm.
this reason, because sometimes they'll be like, what are you talking about? No, 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 that's not happening at all. But you don't see it like that yet. So I think the most important thing is like I've got different tools in my tool bag, and I
Mhm,
can kind of go
mhm,
through them
mhm.
when that fear is creeping up. They don't all work, but I have a few.
Right, right. Well, and I think that's really important for people to understand is that it is a toolbox that you have to have because the hammer is not going to work all the time, right? So you've got
Yeah.
to throw that back in the bag and then maybe pull out a wrench or pull out,
Yeah.
the spackle, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
you've got to use these different things at different times because I know you've heard this, like with new levels come new devils, right? And
Yeah.
so the things that worked in the level that you were at before aren't going to work that time, or maybe it's not going to work as long. And
Yeah.
so it's trying these different things, but it's something that you said earlier, keep showing up though, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not going to feel good all the time, and maybe you are going to beat yourself up a little more than you want to, but keep showing up and keep rejiggering to
Yeah.
keep moving forward, and then creating the results that you or getting the learnings that you need.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's like you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? Like you got to show up and play in order to
Yes.
even know what's going on in the field. And um it doesn't mean that you're going to feel great every time. I mean, there are plenty of days where I'm like, oh, I don't really know what I did today. I don't know what I'm doing. Like everyone has those days too. And
Yes.
and I think I had mentioned self-compassion. I think I'm being much more compassionate about saying like, okay, let it be. Then like don't fight it. Let
Mhm,
today just be
mhm,
that day and don't fight it.
mhm,
Now, of course, you can't
mhm.
have you need the majority of the days to be productive and thoughtful, and
Sure.
you're taking action. But that happens. And to be
Mhm.
honest, when it's happening too, when you're feeling like you have like a ton of fear around something, I think it's really good to sometimes take yourself out of your environment and really examine like, what is it, why am I so afraid of this
Mhm.
thing? What is
Mm,
keeping me from being able to really move forward with that? Is it because my gut is telling me I actually think I should go this direction? Like I also
mhm.
think that if you don't embrace that, you can force it. And I just haven't found like I just haven't found that that usually works to my advantage to force
Yeah.
something when it's just not coming to me.
Yeah. And I feel this is a great segue because I feel like that's something, especially as business owners, you feel like you have to force it a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And I heard someone say this recently that you have to accept something to change it.
Hmm.
And I'm curious to hear from you, where, as you are trying these things that aren't working, or you're thinking about, how do we stay relevant? What do we do? And then balancing that with taking the step back, where would you say you're, in that realm, or maybe in other realms, where you're having to give yourself some permission to step outside of your comfort zone a little bit, or to do things a little differently, or to think differently.
Yeah, I think for example, like with our content, right? Like we would write content based on, maybe like something that was topical or something where it was like 10 of the best books or to read
Mhm,
on from this 10 best leadership books. But the problem was is that we were just sort of writing to be creative and like write what we like and
mhm,
and cover like fun topics. But that actually wasn't beneficial for the business because we should
Mm,
have been thinking about SEO, for example. So it was like, oh, okay, so now we have to learn all about this whole thing and it's called SEO. And then we have to change everything around to make this actually be a tool where when we write stuff that is actually helpful career advice, that people will find it and then they'll be able to help it and use Career Contessa. I'm just using that as like a pure
mhm,
business example of like,
mhm,
we had something, I really liked it the way it was going, but it was sort of broken, not broken, it
mm,
just like it wasn't working the way I thought it was going to work. And so it required us to go in and be like, ask questions like, okay, why is this not working? What it like, let me, and a lot of times I think too, as business owners, there isn't one answer. So you have to like do a ton of research and whether that's listening to podcasts, reading articles, talking to other businesses and trying to figure out, okay, if this isn't working, what is the direction I'm going to go? And then, okay, I've chosen that's the direction. Like, what does that even mean? And I feel like one of my frustrations sometimes with entrepreneurship is I feel like nothing is easy. I'm always having to learn from scratch how to do something. And you're like, oh
mhm.
my gosh, like, can I just for once like know how to set up this technical thing? Or can I just for once have the newsletter, connect the dots between this and this and this and this and this, and it just all works, right? Like it never works quite like that. But and so that's an example of like something that was like it wasn't broken, but it could be better. And you have to stop with all the I always use this metaphor of like glitter and glue. Like they're the glitter items that you see in someone's business, like their highlight reel, the press they've
Mhm.
been in, or whatever item that you think is really cool. But then there's the glue, which is like what holds the business together, and those are the parts that actually like your email, your website, your website provider. For us it was like you can't just write articles that are like fun. You have to like actually think about like write an article so that someone can find it if they're searching for an answer to this problem, right? And
Mhm,
so that just
mhm.
required like a whole other like slew of learning. So I don't know if I'm answering your question at all, but the challenge is that like sometimes you don't know what the answer is. You know something isn't working, but you don't know what it is, and so you have to spend all this time
Mhm,
exploring that too, um,
mhm.
and then coming up with a game plan, and then implementing that game plan, and it still might not work. And it's
Yeah,
still and like there's a fear again of like wasting time and money, which are like my two biggest fears when it comes to this kind of stuff. Um, and you get better at that because
yeah,
your decisions are much more you're working with a lot more knowledge than you were before.
yeah,
But like informed decisions are the best ones. Getting the information to be informed can be challenging for sure. And looking at people on Instagram or TikTok or wherever you're looking at them, it's usually not the best place to find that stuff.
100%. I agree with that wholeheartedly. But from what you were saying, Lauren, what I heard from that is you have given yourself permission to not have all the answers, right? Even 10
Mhm.
years into doing this, giving yourself permission to not have all the answers and giving yourself permission to make mistakes. Like you said, like,
Yeah.
can I just have the newsletter go out and all the dots connect, right? And
Yeah.
not having to send one of those like, oops, we're
Yeah.
trying this again, right? Like giving yourself permission to be like, well, that
Yeah.
didn't work, but I'm going to try it again because, and I think back to something that, one of my first bosses had advice that he had given to me when, I had made a mistake and it kind of, blew up towards the end of the day. And he was like, you know what? No one is going to die because you didn't get this thing out, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and they were like promotional items, right? Like who
Yeah.
cares about
Yeah.
tchotchkes, right? Like
Yeah.
no one is going to
Yeah.
die because they didn't get a squishy ball, right?
Right,
And
right.
so that's what he said, like like this is not going to ruin anyone's life. Okay. So
Yeah.
he's like, you're going to shut down, you're going to go home and you're going to come back tomorrow and we're going to try this again. So that's what I hear you saying is giving yourself permission to say, okay, hey, you know what? That didn't work. That didn't serve anybody. So we're gonna try this again tomorrow or next week or
Hmm.
next month.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, challenging the status quo, like
Yeah.
everyone's doing it that way, but you want to do it that way. Like it takes, courage and giving yourself permission to run the other way when everyone's doing something else. And
Yes.
I think another thing that's happened over the years is like when I first started, I kind of mentioned like the girl boss website, or that
Mhm.
mentality was like really
Mhm.
big, and that was never, I was like, that's not what Career Contessa is about. We like, there was a time where we could have become like an entrepreneurial website where we taught people how to launch businesses and do all that. And I was like, no, I really want to stay true to us being a resource for women who are working for other organizations, right? Not trying to launch and run their own businesses. And for a very long time, I did question whether that was the right move, because there was a lot of money and a lot of opportunity in, and I keep saying girl boss, but I'm using that as like an overall term
Yep.
for kind of
Yep.
this like launching your own business kind of thing. Um, and we didn't have a big conference, and we didn't do a lot of these things that we were watching these other companies do, and they were getting a lot of notoriety from. And it takes a lot of courage, and you have to give yourself permission to also stay true to yourself when you are the glue and you're not the glitter, and yet the
Mm.
glitter is the thing that gets a lot of attention. But ultimately for me, I was like, I want to build a resource that's going to last. And so there's also just recognizing like it's okay to give yourself permission to like grow a little slower, or to do things in a different way.
Mhm.
I think specifically growth, right? Like, or to say, when dollars do come to me, I want them to come to me through this way and not because of that. And like, there's a lot of low hanging fruit sometimes with certain things. I also have a saying at Career Test, I'm like, we're not performing brain surgery. Like, no one is going to die if we send out the wrong thing. But we
Mhm.
we do need to take our, and this is maybe a difference, is like we can't just spit out advice really quickly on an article, because this is advice people are taking and they are saying verbatim to their boss, to their managers, and their careers
Yes.
do have an impact on their
Mhm.
livelihoods and their
Mhm.
entire lives and their families. And
Mhm.
so we need to be thoughtful about things. So it takes us
Mhm.
longer sometimes to develop
Mhm.
something or to do something, but when we do it, it's well researched, it works, and we're not going to leave you hanging with something that, like, making it sound like this one piece of blanket advice works for everybody kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of pieces of permission in there and courage
Mhm.
in there that
Mhm.
don't feel good sometimes in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is, especially as a business owner running a business, that is so important of, you know, going slow to go fast, right? Because it's
Mhm.
really easy to jump on the trends, right? It's
Yeah.
really easy, as you said, to do the things that are glittery and get a lot of notoriety, have a lot of talk value, but do those things, or will they last, right? Are they
Yeah.
lasting trends that are really going to help people, or is it just helping people in this moment, right? Like
Yeah.
there's so many people that are talking, about Instagram and reels, right? Like, and you and I have talked about this, like, oh, it takes so much
I
work to do
know.
that, right? And it's like,
Yes.
is it converting, right? Like, is
Mhm.
it converting for people, or is it, people just,
Yeah.
pointing to things? So I really, and this is one of the reasons why I really enjoy working with Career Contessa on the things that we do together, because I so appreciate and respect the thoughtfulness that you and your team put into the things that you do, because it is really good, rich information that people can use and can use confidently. And you can't
Mhm.
say that about everyone. You
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah, I always used to laugh when like a lifestyle website would be like, so we just decided that women have careers, and so we're going to add a career vertical. And and I would just be like, it's so insulting, but okay. But also, like, it's like these one-off things because they're like quick grabbing for stuff, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
we hear all about like how do you scale and build sustainable businesses, and I think also one thing that people can think of is like give yourself permission to think about what type of like career in life do you want to build for yourself?
Yes.
Like, do you
Yes.
want to be working 100 hours a week?
Hmm.
Do you want to, like, just give, like, we have a worksheet on Career Contessa called Figure Out Your Next Career Move. And the entire basis of the worksheet is for you, for these prompts that ask you, how many people do you want to work with? What type of work environment do you want? Like, think about all this
Yes.
stuff and start to sort
Hmm.
of design what it is. And then
Hmm.
I've just found that sometimes it's easier to start there and work your way backwards than it is to start, because especially when you are building something, whether it's a business or a career or your own brand or whatever, um, you can go a million different directions.
Yeah.
You can.
Yes.
There's always going to be a shiny object that is
Yeah.
is distracting you and that you can run toward. So I think one of the best things you can do, whether it's your career or your business, is start with like being really thoughtful about what you're building and why. What are your values? What is, um,
Mhm.
why are you doing this? What's your why?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
because you need that North Star to kind of help guide you. Because, like I said, there will be so many opportunities for you to like zigzag. And I think, at least for me, one of the things that has been, um, helped me through the years. Sometimes having less resources means you can't zigzag, so you just naturally get taken out of those decision making processes. But it's making sure that the decisions you make align with like the values
Yes.
or the mission of your why too. And
Mhm.
so it's
Mhm.
nice to have that as a North Star, because once you start going, things get busy and you forget a little bit.
Yes. Yeah. And I really, another thing that I love about what you guys are doing is just that, like the intentionality that you put into helping people make those transitions. And, that is a value that I live by in, when I'm coaching people is,
Yeah.
people say, well, I need help updating my resume and applying for jobs. I don't take those coaching opportunities. As you said, it's low hanging fruit, it's easy money, but
Yeah.
that's not aligned because that's you're reacting
Hmm.
to something in your current job that you haven't healed, you haven't
Yeah.
addressed yet. And so I always tell people where we start is the foundation. We're excavating. Why do you want to leave what you're
Yeah.
doing?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
are you going to and why? And if they're not able to identify what they want to do next, then the next thing that we do is also what you were talking about. Like,
Yeah.
can you at least say what you want your experience to be? Like, how do you
Yeah.
want to feel in this next role that you're not feeling now? And that helps people to reverse engineer into what that next thing could be.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that strategy 100%. I mean,
Yeah,
it's why you're paid the big bucks, Kia, because it's the really hard work. And I think
it
the
is.
easy thing in all things in life is to be really reactive instead of proactive. And what I can
Absolutely.
tell you is that when you are really reactive, yeah, you might get to step 2 or 3, but then you're gonna get stopped somewhere. You're gonna get
Mhm,
paused. And the person who's really
mhm.
proactive, they're gonna start on step 1 and jump to step 5. You know what I mean? Like
Exactly.
it just like you are trying to take something really quick and easy. And what I know about careers is that, you know, you have to find or try to create something that aligns with your values. And
Yes.
like, it, there's no way to do this work without doing the work and like being
Yeah.
thoughtful about it.
Yeah.
Um, so, you can be reactive. You totally can. What I find is that
Absolutely.
people who make this more of like a lifestyle change, you know how they always say it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. It's like same with like
Mhm.
professional stuff. Like it can't be this like, quick fad diet that you're on. It has to be this lifestyle change.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you don't do that level of work, there's a really good chance that you're going to recreate exactly what you're leaving because
Yeah,
you haven't
always.
tuned
Hmm.
in close enough. You haven't dialed into what it actually is that you're trying to address.
Yeah,
And the people that are reactive, 3 months in, 2 months in, are going to be like, well, okay, this isn't where I need to be.
yeah, yeah.
So then
And
now you
just
have wasted time and money.
exactly. And here's the thing about entrepreneurship is like a lot of people are necessity entrepreneurs, right? Like they got laid off from their job during COVID. And so they
Yeah.
started a business doing this one thing. And that is okay too. Like there is
Yes.
no hard and fast rule that says because you started a business, you have to do it forever. Because you have this job, you have to do it forever. So if you're listening to this
Yes.
and you're like, oh, I haven't been proactive about stuff, I've been sort of
Mhm.
reacting based on how, like, truly what I've needed in life, that's okay too. It's okay. Like, there are bridge jobs and bridge careers and bridge
Totally.
businesses that get you to your next place. But
Yeah.
while you're in that, carve out 15 minutes every single week to reflect on, things, I call it like keeping a work journal. Take 15 minutes at the end of every week to reflect on this stuff so that you can get closer to a place of when opportunity does arise, or when you do get in a place where um, you can be a little bit more proactive in guiding the direction
Mhm.
of where you want things to
Mhm.
go. It's not made from this, place of like a mad dash. And I just think that when people hear this, they're like, "Oh, I haven't been proactive." That's okay. The
Yeah.
the necessity, the bridge stuff, all fine. It all is fine. Doesn't mean anything about like because you did that, you can't be successful.
Yeah.
monetarily, mentally, physically, emotionally. Like you can have
Mhm.
success in those other parts too.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's being intentional about it.
Yeah.
That if you know that it's a bridge opportunity, or you if it's a necessity, which I hadn't heard
Mhm.
that term, necessity entrepreneur. But if it is one of those things, name it for what it is, and know that there's going to be a limited amount of time that you're going to do that because
Mhm.
it's getting you to where you want to be, right? Like there is no shame in doing what you need to do to make sure that you can keep a roof over your head, pay your
Health
bills,
insurance.
eat,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like all of those things. Like it is important to acknowledge those things, but as long as you are doing it with intention,
Yeah.
knowing that it is getting you closer, or that you are taking steps to get yourself closer to where you want to be, then it's like
Yeah.
you're on the right path.
Yeah. Yeah. And even that's more proactive, right? That's way more
Totally. Yeah.
proactive.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, we've kind of given the answer to this question, but as we, start to land this plane, and I know there are so many people out there who have these big goals or ideas, even, right? Like it's not even a fully formed goal yet, but they have an idea or they have a vision of what they want to do, but they're letting fear and doubt get in the way. What advice do you have for someone who has a goal that they want to achieve and they're just not taking steps yet?
So I think that one of the best pieces of advice around goals I've heard, Dr. Sasha Hines, she's a positive psychologist, and she
Love
said,
her.
yeah, she's amazing. And she said, when you're imagining your goal or what you want to achieve, most of us think about all the amazing things like the success, the neighborhood you're going to live in, the clothes you're going to wear, the car you're going to drive. They always seem to be external things. She said that what you need to do is think about that, but also think about all the terrible things. You don't get the job, you don't get this, you don't get that, you're a failure, you have to show up to the cocktail party and tell someone, oh, I had to close my business. I'm just using these as all the
Yeah.
examples. But her point was, when you imagine all the positives, also imagine all the negatives too. And one of the things, the reason why you do that is because maybe you do have all those fears and those self-doubts, but write them down and have them on paper. Sometimes just seeing them written out makes you feel like, I can handle this. Or
Yes.
you can say, okay, I know what I'm going to feel like or what I'm going to do when I experience all this positive stuff. But now I want to think about, what am I going to feel like and what would I do if I experience these negative things? And I think that's really good advice, because it's like the person who's thinking about their
Mhm.
dream job, they're not
Mhm.
imagining hellish commutes and bad bosses that can't
Mhm.
communicate. And then they run into that and they're like, oh my God, this is not what I thought it was going to be,
Yeah.
And same thing
Yeah.
with the person who has, self doubt. We all have moments of self doubt. We all have fears that pop up, but what are you
Yes.
going to do in those moments? Or maybe just anticipating that you're going to have moments of self doubt means that when you do run into those moments, you're going to feel more
Mhm.
calm about it, because you're like, I anticipated this. I
Mhm.
knew this was going to happen.
Mhm.
I have a feeling that a lot of this comes down to control, retaining control in some way, but it works, So
Which is a whole other episode that you and I
yes,
can talk about.
yes, yeah, totally.
Control.
Yeah, exactly. Like the worst
Yeah.
hangover of your life is not going to be from alcohol. It's going to be from lack of control. Okay.
Yeah.
That's going to hurt. And your
Oh,
expectations
I
not
love
being
that.
met. And, and so, yeah, I think if you're not meeting the goal, or you're not even trying to hit the goal, then also I would say break it down into smaller steps,
Yes.
like
Mhm.
something about that is overwhelming you, right? And I am a big believer in like small wins, and they add up to
Yes.
to build this forward momentum. And in fact, these researchers at Harvard research this. It's called the progress principle. And so there's truly
Mm.
science behind making progress and how it actually helps you move to the next step. So if you are like, oh, I my goal is to become the VP of operations at my company, and I'm just not getting there and this seems so overwhelming, then break it down. Like what are the goals you need to do in the next 6 months, for you to get closer to this big overarching goal. I think that showing yourself and just kind of like building up that momentum, not only do you get closer to your goal, but also you're building like self-confidence and self-esteem, and you
Mhm.
are feeling better about yourself. And I mean, we all know this, but it's like when you're feeling great about yourself, like you do a better job with stuff. You know what I mean? You feel
Yes.
braver to go out and ask for something and confident, And so
Yes.
try not to do places or do things or make decisions from these places of self-doubt and fear. Wait until you are at a place where you're like, I'm feeling much better.
Yes. And when thank you so much for saying that, because when you are making decisions from a place of self-doubt and fear
Hmm.
and, just beating yourself up, when you're making decisions in that energy, that is going to show up in the next thing, right?
Yeah.
Like one of my coaches talked about how, when you're think about how you're baking a cake, right? And think of these like ingredients of
Hmm.
fear and doubt. If those ingredients go into the thing that you are baking or cooking, guess what? The end result, the outcome is going to include those negative things, negative feelings, unproductive feelings that
Yep.
you brought into it. So don't make decisions from places of self-doubt and critique and fear, because
Yeah.
it will be laden in the outcome that you produce.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor for people to
Yeah.
remember is
Yeah.
you want healthy ingredients in whatever you're going to
Yes.
cook up.
Yeah. Absolutely. Lauren, as always, this was such a wonderful conversation. I felt like we were at one of our happy hours.
I know. I miss those.
Yes, but I appreciate you so much for all the gems that you dropped today. This was so rich. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Wonderful. And thank you all for listening and spending your time with us. And until the next time.